right down to the nitty-gritty, like the most fundamental governmental role, defense, right? Keeping us safe. We can trust them here, right? Now, anytime you want to talk about the military budget, and again, if you're like me, this is how I used to be years ago. Years ago, if somebody said we have to take a look at the military budget, I would have said, what are you, some kind of commie? I mean, come on, military budget. I mean, come on, you can't, what, you want us to get overrun by evil people? I mean, you can't possibly want to look at the military budget. But you know what, that's just the way they like it. That there's one sector, everybody's got one area that's off the table we can't even look at. But we can't afford to do this anymore. We can't afford this crazy assumption that, yeah, the government is full of liars and scoundrels who exploit us and loot us and lie to us all the time. But this one department is full of angels. And moreover, they're so full of angels that we will expressly exempt them from audit. The Department of Defense is expressly exempted from being audited. But we don't need that, right? Because, I mean, these are all decent people. Well, there's a missing $1 trillion, for example, that I'd like to know where it went. Since 9/11, the Pentagon budget has gone up by about the increase has been about $2 trillion. Now, half of that went to the war. So where'd the other half go? That's a good question. Because when you actually look at the state of the U.S. military, you compare it before and after, well, the combat air fleet has declined by more than 50% at a time when its budget went up by 43%. We've seen the number of battle force ships go down from about 333 to 287, and the Army, which got a 55% funding increase, went up by about 7%. That's what $1 trillion got you. I've got military experts in here saying, this is the biggest fleecing of the public in the history of this country. But it goes totally ignored. So, you know, that's a question you might want to ask if you happen to run into a former Secretary of Defense, just in your travels. You might want to inquire. Or finally, what I also talk about in here is what all this military spending, what it does to the economy. It has economic consequences that I think people don't realize. And just to focus on just one of them, the problem is that when your firm caters to the Pentagon, it becomes less attuned to, you know, cost control. When the major client is the Pentagon, cost control is not their major concern. And I'm not even saying that to be flippant or tongue-in-cheek. But from the Pentagon's point of view, they will find the money one way or another. For them, they're much more concerned about how well can you work with the military community. How well can you deal with the fact that we might be changing our requests of you, you know, every few weeks or something. How well can you adapt? How well do you speak our language? Cost, you know, it's a concern, but it's not number one. And so what begins to happen is that these firms begin to lose their competitive edge because they're not under that kind of market discipline anymore. And I show in here how this happened to the once robust U.S. machine tool industry, which is the envy of the world. Then the Pentagon became its major client, and suddenly the machine tool industry becomes very uncompetitive, weirdly unable to keep up with cost cuts anywhere else in the world. In fact, in the 60s, the big thing was something called numerical control machine tool technology. Now, the Japanese developed it cheaply. The Germans developed it cheaply. The U.S. firms developed it, but at a price no private firm could possibly afford. Only the Pentagon could afford it. Well, this sort of thing we see seeping through anyone who touches the Department of... In fact, when we look at some of these major firms like Grumman and Boeing, and some of them that then went into trying to provide mass transit systems, well, you just have to read about that. But like Grumman provided buses for New York City that were so bad and broke down so much that the city ended up suing the company. And this is like it's an epidemic, but it's generally not talked about. And then we could, again, there's just so many things I could tell you about here.